That's huge. That's a big jump, you know? Alright. I think I'm ready. I think we're just gonna jump into it. Shortest fucking intro. I'm not gonna talk about this game too long because there's honestly not that much to say, but Wario Land Shake It's a Wii game that came out in 2007, made by fucking Goodfeel. The game has no one from the original 5 games contributing to the development in any way, not even in supervising or programming roles. This is because Goodfeel is an entirely new staff made up of former Konami employees, specifically from the Kobe studio. Didn't that guy die in like a plane crash? You think if he didn't, he would have been in Space Jam 2? Rick and Morty were in Space Jam 2, did you guys see that? I mentioned before how the staff might have added to the game's lackluster quality, which I stand by, but there's some genuine talent over at Goodfeel coming over from Konami, don't get me wrong. They have a track record of interesting games under their belt, like Castlevania Circle of the Moon, Goemon on N64, and Rakuga Kids. It's a game I pretend to like. They also made like a Mickey Mouse dancing game? The Kobe branch of Konami eventually dissolved into the Tokyo branch in 2002, which I'm sure saw the leave of a bunch of prominent devs, leading to the formation of Goodfeel. These guys probably didn't want to be stuck making fucking DDR games until the end of time. Jesus Christ, Konami! There were like 12 DDR games made after Kobe got dissolved. What's the point in playing a game like this on a controller anyway? I recently played DDR Supernova 2 on a real cabinet, and it was fucking awesome feeling that game click with how you're supposed to play it. Why the fuck would I ever play DDR any other way? I wanna dance! It makes sense some of these guys would eventually end up forming their own studio partnered with Nintendo. It seems like they were all pretty dedicated to making the games they did. There's a couple of really ambitious looking games under their portfolio, especially this one called Gun Gauge I really dig the look and feel of. Goodfeel definitely isn't made up of the same people it was when it started, but now they make games like Kirby's Epic Yarn and Yoshi's Woolly World or whatever. Lots of things that fall into that kind of cutesy craft aesthetic. Shake It's an early project from Goodfeel, so they weren't really settled into that style yet, but honestly, as iffy as I am on Shake It's presentation, it's so much better than what they do now. I'm just not a huge fan of the softness of their later games, especially in Epic Yarn where it directly correlates to the difficulty and fun factor of that game. Shake It, on the very least, had an idea to its visual style I can resonate with, but that just comes down to personal taste. They do end up reusing a lot of sound effects from Shake It to Kirby, but whatever, who cares? They decided to go for a hand-drawn style for the character sprites in Shake It, and I think it really pays off in setting the game apart. Apparently they were toying around with the idea of making the game have 3D graphics before settling on this, but damn, good on them. This kind of shit isn't cheap, especially considering they hired a ton of talent from studios like Production IG to do the key animation on the characters. It definitely would have been more cost efficient to just model and rig all the characters out and animate them that way, but going for a hand-drawn style definitely sets this game apart from most platformers on the Wii for sure. You know, except like Rayman Origins, which I think you should definitely play instead. I did a little research on the animators involved and didn't find too much of anything interesting. I don't care much for most of the anime these guys have worked on, that or I've just never heard of them. It is cool they had some animators off Dead Leaves working on this though, that movie kicks ass. It might have been worth it to get a different art director for the style of this game though, because that all being said, I'm really not a fan of this game's presentation. I don't want to imply they spent all their budget on good talent to get the cutscenes and character sprites right, but almost every other presentation aspect of this game is lacking. For starters, these level backgrounds and tile sets are really bland. I get they were going for like a painterly look, but it really just doesn't work, probably because not a lot of work went into making sure they did it right. I know I just brought up Rayman Origins, but I think that game's a good example of doing this kind of art direction right. The character animation in Origins isn't frame by frame, hand-drawn though, but do you really care that much when you're in the thick of playing it? It's a good-ass game. I'm not a huge fan of how the character sprites tween around, but it looks good for what it is. Shake It feels like it was really pushing for proper implementation of this style of animation, but again, I don't really care when I'm playing it. And I'm not having fun to begin with, so I just end up nitpicking. Shit like this doesn't end up mattering unless the rest of your game's artistic presentation is equally as sound, and when the locales are as bland as they are, there's a glaring issue here. They all have this really faded look to them that adds nothing to the aesthetic I'm assuming the game is pushing for. It's really sterile, and there's nothing interesting going on, especially with the color choice. I say assuming because I'm not even really sure what the game is going for. I guess they're trying to go for like a papery, treasure mappy look with the texturing and brushwork they did on these assets, but aside from the world map, nothing is really supporting that. It's not something like, let's say, like Cuphead, where it has an aesthetic it's pushing for from the very beginning, and every attribute and choice made relating to its presentation is adding to that. To do hand-drawn animation for your platformer game is kind of a tall order though, so I'll give them a bit of a break on this. While they might have had Nintendo's budget going into this, they also had Nintendo's schedule. It's not like they're an indie studio and can just take as much time as they want. There's deadlines to this shit, something Studio MDHR doesn't really have to worry about making Cuphead. Also, maybe comparing it to the literal peak of hand-drawn animation in platformers isn't fair, but I don't know, why not? They decided on this style pretty early into development, so you'd think they'd make sure they covered all their bases into making this look really good, so I think it deserves some criticism. It's the part of the game people unanimously say is the best about it, but honestly, it didn't do much for me. It just feels a bit directionless. Like, they had a really good idea for the character animation, but everything else was just an afterthought. But even then, as much credit as I'm giving to the character animation, it's nothing too special in terms of flair. They're really misunderstanding what made each Wario Land game's artistic style so appealing, especially with the proportions of Wario himself. Compare this to every other Wario Land, and you can tell that the person in charge of designing the characters had a different idea of how Wario should be represented. In Shake It, he just sort of looks like Wario. There isn't much setting him apart from how he looks in every other Mario spin-off he's in. But maybe this isn't the designer's fault. This game was made during the time where Nintendo really started to be anal about artistic expression of their characters in their game, so maybe it was gonna look more unique, but they ended up changing it. I don't know. I really just don't like how he looks in-game here. Every other game has him kinda stout and small, almost chibi-ish, but still depicted his macho-ness properly with his animations, but keeping his goofiness intact with his expressions. There really isn't any of that in Shake It. He holds this one face the entire time, and it's boring. His proportions are at least consistent, but again, that's just really boring. If anything, I'd appreciate if they were a little less consistent. There's rare moments of this, but they're so few and far between with Wario, the character himself, that you get more personality out of these bare-bones enemies. I don't know, maybe I'm being too hard on the art in this game, but really, it's not all that. I play a lot of stylized games, so maybe I just refuse to settle for what I view as less.
What the hell is this? Looks like Las Vegas. You know, I actually kinda like this stuff.
I'm just not a fan of how everything interacts with each other stylistically, or perhaps the lack of interaction between everything. No, just look at this fucking screen. Why am I playing this in 4x3? What purpose is there in making the HUD look like this? I get they want to show the player their missions at all times to make sure they keep them in mind, but then we get into a gameplay issue. A lot of the time, you can't even complete all these missions in one playthrough of a level, so there's really no point to have them all designated on the screen at the same time this way, especially if it's going to give you more tunnel vision than the GoldenEye intro. No! I really see no reason for this to be a thing in the first place. Why would I want arbitrary replayability like this? It's like a fucking mobile game. I'm not playing Angry Birds, I'm playing Wario. You're making me angry. You're just filling each level with these menial and sometimes even annoying tasks for me to complete for the sake of encouraging me to play a level over again. Well, newsflash, good feel. I want to replay the levels if they're fun anyway. Nah, I'm getting ahead of myself. Yeah, just HUD is fucking stupid. There's no reason you couldn't have just taken these stupid borders away, kept the treasure and mission icons in their place, and moved the health and score to the corners of the screen. I'm usually not a stickler for shit like this. I think all those 16:9 mods for classic Sonic games are kinda stupid, but this is a modern platformer in 2007. It's never an issue in gameplay. Like, I never find myself calling bullshit on a challenge because of the screen size, but it's just a bizarre choice. There's no reason for it. There are fucking GameCube games that have widescreen options. What the hell is this game's excuse? Anyway, back to the backgrounds and tile sets. I will say I do like that the overall color palette of the screen you're on reflects in the lighting and overlay on the character sprites. It's a nice touch. I know I just complained about the colors earlier, and these are still really ugly, but I really just like this overlay. It's especially apparent in closed-off areas. It's a little detail I'm glad they thought to include. You know, this whole game style kind of reminds me of Spelunky. But like a diet Spelunky. They both got this like squared off grid-based structure to the levels, and they're both going for a similar look. Every interactable sprite has a stark outline over it to make sure they stand out in both games, but Shake It continues that into the borders of the foreground, and it looks really jarring, whereas Spelunky doesn't. I think Spelunky does its presentation better, obviously, In fact, I kinda wish Shake It just looked like Spelunky altogether, down to the character proportions. You could get away with modding Wario into Spelunky 2 and passing it off as a new Wario land. Hell, just make it look like the characters in that new WarioWare. That's a nice balance between something that looks 2D that's actually a 3D model. They even got the shoulder bash in there already. The music in this game is also boring. I don't think I remember a single song on the entire track list, and I definitely wouldn't be able to hum any of them to you. Like, it's structurally sound, it's not abhorrent to listen to or anything, but nothing about any of the tracks says anything about the level you're in or the game you're playing. Wario Land 4 has kind of the same issue, but they're constantly doing weird things with the sound design and music implementation that makes up for it. Shake It just has some repeating loops with a ton of obnoxious instrumentation. The composer, Tomoya Tomita, doesn't really have that much of an exemplary background. I think his position at Goodfeel was more just for him to finally make some actual game soundtracks. You know, like, be a composer on a project. I'm sure he'd much rather be doing what he's doing now than doing the sound design on Animaniacs on SNES. That's a thankless job. In any case, I'm really not so impressed with his work. It's serviceable, but honestly not even worth bringing up. The only reason I did was so I could wrap up the presentation segment to solidify my opinion that it's just okay. Kinda like the gameplay. The whole gimmick of Shake It is that you jerk off the Wiimote really hard to shake things. The more you shake shit, the more shit'll come out.
Shake, shake.
You shake enemies to kill them and get health, and you shake bags of treasure to make money spill out, and that's about it. That's all you really do with the shaking. You don't even use it in any of the bosses minus the last one, which, thank God. The shaking is really boring. There's really nothing to it. You'd think there'd be puzzle stuff like shaking an enemy to change the state it's in so you can complete a challenge, but no. Like maybe shaking a red enemy until it's blue so it can cross a bridge that only blue enemies can to flip a switch or something. I don't know, anything! It's literally only ever used to maximize the amount of treasure you can get out of a bag, but at that rate it's just slowing down gameplay where you could take the mechanic out and it would be better. It would be cooler if the shaking was analog, like if you shook the Wiimote slower, you'd get a different effect and animation than if you were to shake it as hard as you could. As it is, you can only do the latter, no matter how gentle the movement, and I think they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot here with this. Granted, I can't really think of any Wii games that do something like that, so maybe they considered it, but it didn't end up panning out. In any case, though, they're simplifying this potentially cool mechanic that could be used for so many cool puzzles just for the sake of brevity. It's lame as hell. The Wii's a cool console. It's got a bunch of games that take advantage of its characteristics in unique ways. What's this game's excuse? Every aspect of being on the Wii this game uses is so surface level and never applied to anything engaging. It makes the game a huge slog. Should have called it Wario Land Aim It, because there's more aiming in this game than there is shaking, which I'm honestly thankful for. At the very least, the idea of using the tilt controls for aiming is a cool evolution of the throw mechanic from the previous games. It's definitely more involved than shaking just by virtue, so there's a fuck ton of potential application of this too. I'm imagining things like precision aiming and throw timing being key in solving a puzzle or reaching a treasure while on a track. Or maybe throwing different types of enemies at a wall doesn't kill them, but makes them more hostile or something. You could even have that aspect sometimes be needed to solve a puzzle. There's a ton you could do. However, this game, unfortunately just like the shaking, resorts to the easiest option on all fronts. There's a block on the wall, and you need to aim and hit it to pass through to progress. Do it. It's just fucking boring. The only thing that could make this worse is if Wario had a little companion that spoke like 18 lines of dialogue about how to throw shit every time you did it. Oh wait, they already did that! I wish Shake It took more pages out of Yoshi's Island or something. That game does this same idea really well, and it makes a lot of sense just looking at the game side by side. This was even brought up in an interview with the devs, but they said they didn't even think about it during development. What? It never once occurred to you guys you could have referenced one of the most popular Nintendo platformers that also has a central mechanic about throwing shit to design your game? You know, I guess it makes sense. You barely use the old Wario Land games for design reference for Shake It, so why would you look at anything at all? Oh, but you got Captain Syrup in this game. Fuck off! Who cares? It's like when Iwata asked the Splatoon devs about Mario Sunshine and they went, "Oh, I forgot about that game. I never made the connection. Come on!" You know, I guess in that way, it makes sense Goodfeel later went on to make Yoshi games with the same mechanic, and I heard good things about Woolly World, so maybe that game's the evolved version of this idea that I want. You know, speaking of Yoshi's Island, Nintendo's usually all about using a console's capabilities to the fullest in whatever game they're making. So I'm surprised the GBA version of Yoshi's Island didn't have an option for tilting the handheld to aim your shot. I mean, hell, Wario did that with WarioWare Twisted, but you know, I guess Yoshi did it later with Topsy Turvy. Hey, Kirby did it too with Tilt and Tump. What the hell is going on here? Why is no one talking about how similar these three are? They all transform, they all have games made by Goodfeel, they all have tilt games on the Game Boy. This can't be a coincidence. Nintendo's been out of ideas for decades. They've just been selling you the same thing all this time. Triple Deluxe is a Virtual Boy Wario Land copy. Oh my god! It feels like they wanted to circumvent all this bland gameplay with replayability, but like I said before, it's really arbitrary. There's optional missions in each level that, when completed, grant the player a star that does nothing. You know, for as eccentric of a mechanic collecting treasure is in this game, and how much they encourage you to do so, and how obsessed this game is with taking from its predecessors in pointless ways, you'd think they'd bring back the score-based endings for this one. Instead, you use treasure to buy fucking area maps so you can play the game. Please! Anyway, there's really no point in doing any of these fucking dumb missions. None of them change the level in any way. They aren't designed in a way where you can complete them all at once, forcing you to replay a level more than once if you want to get everything. But why would you want to get everything when getting everything nets you nothing? Oh boy, my room has a bunch of treasure now. Fuck you! Maybe it's just because I'm tired, but I think I fucking hate this game. I'm not going to be doing an extensive talk about all the bosses in this game because I'd be wasting my time, but the only time Shake It held my attention was during the final boss. You're facing the main villain of the game, the Shake King. Oh, it's like shaking. I get it, haha. When he runs at you, you can stun him so that you're able to grab him and shake the shit out of him for making you play such a boring game. He's the one interactable in the game that spills so much dough out of him it can be really satisfying to drain him of all he's worth. What's cool too is that he does the same thing to you later in the fight, and it's a really demoralizing thing. This fight is the highlight of the game, which is really unfortunate because it's at the very end. There was a lot of thought put into how it functions, which is a breath of fresh air considering the rest of the bosses, which I don't even want to talk about because they're your basic boring boo-boo whatever fuck off platformer bosses. I don't want to talk about them. This game feels like it doesn't know what it wants to be other than a boring, run-of-the-mill platformer, something Wario Land discreetly is not. Even the worst games in the series have at least unique things about them that make up their own identity. One is rough around the edges, but it's at least trying to be something, an inverse of a Mario game. It's slower paced and has a lot of boring open parts, but its fun parts are always right around the corner. Virtual Boy Wario Land has boring bosses, but makes up for it in its levels and its priority to surpass previous Nintendo platformers' athleticism. 2 and 3 try to fuse Metroid and Mario sensibilities to a fault, but it sets them apart as unique in their own right. And 4 is just perfect. Shake It just lacks the identity entirely. You'd think it would be able to make up for it with its art, but even that isn't all there. It tries to take things that worked in the original 5 games, like transformations or the escape sequences from 4, but doesn't commit to them or work to evolving those ideas. It makes it not even worth talking about. It's kind of a shame because this was the last time we saw Wario Land in any capacity. I actually see people talking about how they like this game a lot, but I don't know, it's kinda shitty. Actually, I think it's really shitty. There's a lot to enjoy about the art, even if it wasn't for me, but the game itself is just a gimmicky nightmare of uncapitalized potential. Potential that was already filled by games that came before it. Shake It has really easy shoes to fill, and all it needed to do was improve on what was there, but instead of it being an evolution of the series, it was completely dumbed down. You know, maybe not every game in a series needs to be better than the last. Whether it be taking the fundamentals to their next logical step or reintroducing the series to a crowd of newer people, every sequel project has its own priorities. The most disappointing thing about Shake It is that it feels like they really did try to reinvent the series while still maintaining aspects about it they thought people liked, but just resulted in a boring experience. It's like they didn't understand what made the original so well loved to begin with, but were tasked at making a sequel instead of something original with the character. They just didn't push on the gas hard enough and ended up getting rear-ended by the dude behind them at the McDonald's drive-thru.
Oh man, get real, will ya?
Yeah.
Get real.
Yeah. Yeah, get real. You just hit my car.
I get that this is Goodfeel's first serious game, but with the talent they had on, it's really disappointing to see such a boring game in a really interesting franchise. I hate to say they ruined their chance, because I really do think they could make something great, but I think giving this to Goodfeel was a bad idea. If Nintendo was so keen on giving Wario to Goodfeel for a project, I think it would have benefited not only the end product, but also the studio to give them full creative control. I'm imagining an alternate universe where Goodfeel was told to make a Wario platformer that wasn't in the Wario Land series, but still made use of the Wii's capabilities. It could have still had all the motion stuff in there, but giving them free rein to stray away from the fundamentals of the previous Wario platformers could have resulted in something infinitely cooler. Maybe it could have even started a new line of Wario platformers. A series that takes advantage of each of the unique characteristics of the console it's on. It would be like what WarioWare is, but for platformers. Hell, Wario World kind of fits this bill. Why didn't they just continue with that instead? They made it right after Wario Land 4. Seemed like they were setting up Wario to start his journey into 3D, but they dropped it right after the game came out. Nintendo's done this kind of idea before with games like Donkey Kong Jungle Beat. That game isn't a sequel to Donkey Kong Country or anything, but it's still a 2D DK platformer, just with its own set of rules. They're games within the same genre and franchise, but exist separately from each other. I'd love to see them take this direction with Wario someday, or just revisit Wario Land at all, whether it be a new game or a remake or something. Boring shit like Shake It pisses me off more than games that try their hardest to do something new but fail, so this makes Shake It my least favorite entry in the Wario Land series, and it's probably just the worst overall. I'm sorry I didn't really get into the nitty-gritty of why I feel this way, but what the hell did you want me to say? There's really nothing here to talk about. It's all just lame. So what the hell's up with all these games? Well, I'll tell you what. Nothing!
Now get out!
What?
Get out!
I honestly started all this having just a passive interest in Wario Land, but now that we're at the end, I think I honestly just wanted an excuse to check out and dissect the series like this. There's a really captivating history here to me, down to the connections between projects from those who worked on the games, to the progression of Wario's character, to the quality of the actual games. I wasn't expecting to get so much out of this. I think Wario went from something I couldn't give much of a shit about to something really important to me. These games are really something special, and I think each one of them offers something unique to all kinds of people, depending on what they're looking for in a platformer. To explain what I mean, I've designated each game into their own subgroups, and I've been referring to them as such more or less this entire time. Action platformer, puzzle platformer, and blend. Action and puzzle platformer are pretty self-explanatory, but I've described Virtual Boy Wario Land and Wario Land 4 as blend multiple times so far and just kinda held on it. So what the fuck does that mean? Well, I made it up. In this case, it basically just means it's taking the best parts of an action platformer and the best parts of a puzzle platformer and literally blending them together. Now, I don't like some random YouTuber guy making up game genres as much as you do. I've had enough of this fucking Wario-like video in my recommended, but I think this is important because these two games, especially Wario Land 4, really stand on their own. They aren't wholly action or puzzle oriented. They're a yummy sandwich of the two you can order on your lunch break. So I had to call them something to fit them in this chart I made describing each game. And mixture sounded gay, so I'm not doing that. Now hey, I know that sounds academic, but I'm not. I'm not your teacher, and I've definitely never stepped foot in a classroom, so I'm not gonna sit here and act like I think I know what a Venn diagram is. In fact, I know this isn't how one works, but this was the only way I could figure out how to visualize what the fuck I'm talking about, okay? I don't know why I'm so angry here. It's kind of funny. I made Wario Land 1 completely represent the action platformer section since it's definitely the one Wario Land game that is just trying to be a good action game. It's simple. It isn't doing anything crazy or trying to reinvent the genre. It's just trying to be fun, which it is. And that, in turn, ended up reinventing the wheel, at least for Mario games at the time. Now, from here we can go two directions. We can go the Hosokawa route, or we can go to the Matsuoka route. Taking the Hosokawa direction, we get Wario Land 2, which is definitely still a platformer. Wario has all his moves from the last game, some new ones, and the point of the game is to reach the goal in each level. What sets Wario Land 2 apart, though, is that eventually you realize it has multiple exits in specific levels, which will take you down different paths, to different final bosses, endings, etc. There's an aspect of puzzle solving to traversing the world of the game. You do it to figure out which levels have extra exits and which don't, but it isn't the entire focus around the game. You can experience everything it has to offer without deviating from the main path, and I think the way this works is really ambitious. The game leans toward being a puzzle platformer with action elements, which sets Wario Land 3 up to be a full-fledged puzzle platformer. You need to unlock your moves by exploring. Every level has like 4 exits. Its full focus is on being a puzzle platformer, edging on Metroidvania. It sucks! Taking the Matsuoka route, we get to Virtual Boy Wario Land, which has aspects of both the original game and its Game Boy sequels, but transformed these ideas to be applicable to a more athletic game. It definitely wants you to have the bulk of your fun by jumping around more than it wants you to have fun by exploring your surroundings and shit. But that being said, both genres are represented in ways that perpetuate the game's flow-based movement priority. It's the beginnings of a perfect blend to both of the core genres. Wario Land 4 is a big yummy sandwich with the olives flicked off, cause that shit's nasty. It's the perfect combination of everything Wario Land had covered at that point with the shit that didn't work left out, which validates its position as a blend game. It isn't more so an action platformer than it is a puzzle one, and it isn't more so a puzzle platformer than it is an action one. It's handcrafted to be as balanced as it possibly could be, which it succeeds in with flying colors. And this doesn't mean it's a perfect game, but it does make it a damn great one. And Shake It, The point of this visual is to have all the games in one place. With this, you can apply your own game preferences to see which of these games might be the best for you. If you're into simpler experiences, you might want to check out Wario Land 1. It's a bite-sized joy to play that's really tightly packed and thought out. Hell, if you liked it, you might even want to check out Shake It as well. As much as I've been shitting on it, Shake It's definitely a meaty casual platformer. While that might not be something I'm in the market for, and I ultimately think the game wasn't worth my time, that doesn't mean it won't be worth yours. I think it's a pretty good companion piece to the original game. They definitely work together as fun experiences for someone who might not be looking for something as complex as Wario Land 3 or something as difficult as Wario Land 4. If you dig dense games with a lot to find and squeeze dry of, you might want to check out Wario Land 2 and 3. They're huge games crafted with a lot of love. Maybe not enough attention, but that's okay. They're trying something really unique with their game philosophy, and I think they ought to be commended for something like that, especially for the time. Tons of people cite these games as their absolute favorites of the series for good reason. If you want my opinion, Virtual Boy Wario Land and Wario Land 4 definitely ended up being my favorites. They both just embody everything I like about all the ideas presented, which makes them easily recommendable to anyone interested in any of the previous games. It feels like they were somehow made for everyone to get a handle on and enjoy, but
refused to pull any punches when it came to mechanics or game structure.
They aren't hardcore or anything, but they offer up a lot of engaging gameplay and never at the expense of your patience. All they really need to do to be perfect games in my eyes is swap out Wario for Sonic and add a couple of loop-de-loop. Looking at the whole thing altogether, I hope you can see where I'm coming from when I say there's a Wario Land game for every kind of platformer fan. This is definitely one of Nintendo's more interesting series of platformers. I think their insistence on never revisiting it is reflective of their creative fall, but it also oddly maintains the series' mystique. If we got another Wario Land and it was absolutely dog shit, it would be a really strange blemish on this really thumbs-up series. Shake It's already a pretty bad pimple scar, so honestly, I don't think I want any more Wario Land, at least not by Nintendo.
If they were to do anything else with the series, I'd want it to be re-releases of Virtual Boy Wario Land and Wario Land 4, mostly because those games are hard to play nowadays legally.
They're both rare as fuck. Every fucking game store I go to tells me they sold out of them the day before I got there. Either they're lying to me, or I'm on their do not sell to list. If only there was some kind of successor to the series not made by Nintendo that takes inspiration from all the important characteristics of each game, evolves them further than they have been before, and introduces enough original into the mix for the end result to stand on its own individually. Oh, wait!
In the interest of maintaining my honest opinion, I go off script a little bit here, so if the delivery sucks, bear with me.
If you've been paying attention at all over the course of this video, you probably picked up that I'm pretty fucking harsh on indie games. They're usually made by a small group of individuals, sometimes just one fucking guy, so the gate to make a fuck ton of mistakes and just let it happen is huge. You're not working with a team of people who can check your work for you based on their experience coding on, like, fucking Burger Time. You have complete freedom. You don't got some four-eyed Japanese fuck bitching in your ear about UV unwrapping something sloppily or a white-skinned sex pest calling you into his office for a private meeting. You can do whatever the hell you want, but that also means there's more of a chance you're gonna fuck something up royally in the design or programming phase, and your project can come out half-baked or just not come out at all. I have a huge amount of respect for people who do get their projects out, but since they are individuals working within their own guidelines, whenever an indie game comes out and it's supposedly the next best thing since sliced bread, I raise an eyebrow. I'm not gonna give indie devs any stolen valor or credit based on the grounds that I could probably spot them having a mental breakdown in the women's section of my local Target. Holy fuck! I'm gonna be as honest as I can and tell it like how I would tell Miyamoto, even if there's a higher chance indie devs will hear the criticism I'm putting out there. That all being said though, I won't have to be as hyperbolically rude as I usually am to indie games with Pizza Tower, cause this shit's actually fucking good. I'm not here to give you anything that's too in-depth on the game, mostly because it's not even out yet at the time of recording this, but I am here to recommend it to you since there's some public builds out there already.
Of course, as easy as it is to compare this game to Wario Land, it really is its own thing and should be treated as such. I'm only really bringing it up in tandem with Wario Land because of its origins and upbringing, but again, it really is its own thing. Like Freedom Planet isn't a Sonic game, but there's really clear influences there, so it's worth bringing up when talking about it.
It's kind of like that, but you know, Pizza Tower doesn't suck like Freedom Planet.
It's being directed and designed by this dude named Pizza Tower Guy, but he's getting some programming help from a few others as well. PTG's been making games since forever, and he hadn't really found his footing until he started development on this game called Pizza Massacre, which was supposed to be a weapon-focused action game starring this pizza man Peppino. PTG wasn't really feeling the game, but he liked the foundation enough to retool it into a project that was meant to be a successor to Wario Land 4 with more of an emphasis on the branching states the character could enter. Skip ahead a bit, a few public builds had been released, more information came out over time, and all of a sudden, this is one of the most promising upcoming indie platformers. As you'd imagine, the game uses Wario's movement structure as a base, You got your shoulder bash, your run, transformations, escaping the level through the way you came in, all the good stuff. But then you have things that are wholly unique to the game, like running up walls, canceling states into other moves, screen clears, combat moves aside from throwing, a combo system, characters that function completely different from each other. You have a fuck ton of options here. Everything about the way the characters work are very obviously based around Wario, but everything added on top of that makes me forget this is even Wario inspired sometimes. It really transcends that label. PTG even stated that even though Wario Land is like a huge influence on the game, other games like Earthworm Jim and Jazz Jackrabbit influenced the player movement and stage design's relationship. I've seen this game described as Wario meets Sonic a lot, and while I can definitely see it, I think the Jazz Jackrabbit comparison is a little more apt. You're winding around these playground levels in a way really similar to that game, and I can definitely feel the impact the series has on Pizza Tower just by looking at it. But what's so great about Pizza Tower in relation to Wario Land is that you can tell the devs really took each of the prominent games in that series and put them under a magnifying glass. A ton of work went into making this game a proper evolution of the ideas introduced in Wario Land 4, but there are a ton of aspects present here that are definitely drawn from the other games, even 2 and 3. The overall speed of the game is akin to how fast you can go in Virtual Boy Wario Land, and the secret rooms and treasures remind me a lot of Wario Land 1 and Virtual Boy Wario Land secret stuff. Some of the builds even have extra goals for you to complete in the levels, a much more digestible version of the same idea introduced in 3 and Shake It's missions. This determination to evolve what was introduced for Wario Land goes as far as the visual style for the game even. I know I mentioned this before, but comparing Wario Land 4 and Pizza Tower's visual styles and how they contribute and fit with the gameplay is like comparing night and day. Pizza Tower's more haphazard animation and loose pixel-brushed assets are coupled with the insane movement you'll end up doing in the game, and I really can't imagine this game looking any other way. Even down to the music, this shit rules. The music in this game is being done by a Mr. Sauceman and Frostix, but its main theme was done by Post Elvis, who does a lot of freelance work for a bunch of indie games. I like his work a lot in specific. I sort of hope he's able to do more tracks for the game. Anyway, they use a lot of the same musical techniques used in Wario Land 4. They do like the voice sampling, or sometimes even using the exact same organ, but the composition themselves are a lot more memorable and catchy than anything in any Wario Land. This shit gets stuck in my head all the time. These tracks don't fuck around when they need to give off a specific tone. There's a Bone in My Spaghetti and Pizza Mayhem in particular are some of the most standout tracks for me. I love the electric guitar and vocals used in both. If anything, I can't wait for this game to release on Steam so I can buy a game with its soundtrack for the first time in my fucking life. It's got fucking multiplayer, it's got a fucking pinball level. I know I sound like every other YouTube game guy who's talked about this game so far. That is to say, I'm sucking it off, but it really is just that good. If there's one thing that Pizza Tower does infinitely better than every Wario Land game, it's that you can actually reliably climb ladders. Wario can't do that shit. He's either not close enough or too fucking close! That's the end of the video.